Good morning everyone, Rich Wong here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most interesting cameras that I've tested in a while. This is the Fujifilm GFX100RF. It's a compact medium format camera with a massive 102 megapixel sensor, but is it really as good as it sounds? Or did Fujifilm sacrifice too much to squeeze all that power into such a small body? I have been testing it out alongside its brother, the Fujifilm X100RF, and I've also took both of them out to the Auckland Easter show last weekend, shoot during the day and well into the night, just to see how they stack up in different lighting situations. So let's break it all down. Yes, I heard the GFX100RF is compact, but holding it in hand, I was still surprised. It's basically a taller version of the X100RF. Pretty much the same width and same depth, just a bit taller. And the lens is shockingly small. It's only slightly thicker than the one on the X100RF. And that's impressive considering the camera has a medium format sensor about 4 times the size of the sensor on the X100RF. Even more surprising is how sharp that little lens is. We'll look at the image quality soon, but a couple of other things first. If you want full weather sealing, you will need to attach the adapter ring and filter, which does make the lens stick out quite a bit more. Well, the good news is Fujifilm includes the adapter ring, protective filter, and lens hood all in the box, unlike the X100 series where those are sold separately. So that's a nice touch. Since the lens flare control is reasonably good, I didn't find having the lens hood make too much difference to the lens flare protection. I feel the biggest benefit of the lens hood is for physical protection. So if you really want to keep the lens compact, you could consider not installing the adapter and the lens hood to minimize the size of the camera. Build quality is also on another level. Fujifilm cameras are usually solid, but this time, the one-piece aluminum top plate on the GFX100RF feels ultra premium. Even though it doesn't have a big grip, it's surprisingly comfortable to hold one-handed. The layout is familiar if you have used an X100, but there are some changes. There's a new aspect ratio dial at the top of the camera and a repurposed ViewFinder lever, and there's also a multifunctional control next to it. Together, they handle digital zoom, viewfinder modes, and more. It is clever and the position is very handy, but I still find myself fumbling a bit after a week. If you also have a GFX100RF, I'm curious to know if you also have the same experience or not. Shooting with the GFX100RF honestly feels just like shooting with the X100RF. It's quick, responsive, and the camera is light enough to carry around for hours without fatigue. Start up the camera is fast, menu systems are pretty snappy, it just doesn't feel like some other slow medium format cameras in the market. The only slowdown I noticed was in burst mode. Clearing the buffer takes time. So if you are buying this camera, please make sure you use a fast SD card with this camera. Now let's get into what you are probably most interested in, which is image quality. The GFX100RF 102 megapixel medium format sensor delivers some seriously detailed files. If you look at this photo and zoom into the rider's helmet, you can see all the fine details in the hair and around the helmet. This photo was shot wide open at f4, and the sharpness is very impressive. And have a look at this side-by-side comparison with the 40 megapixel X100RF. The GFX100RF just captures a lot more details. Even in the corners, the GFX holds details better, and that is with Lightroom's default RAW conversion. It's not just about the megapixel though. The lower pixel density per area on the GFX makes it less demanding on the lens, so you get sharp results across the frame. Close-up shooting capability is okay, but this is definitely an area that a smaller sensor camera like the X100 has advantage. Chromatic aberration shows up sometimes at f4. But for such a tiny lens, I think the overall image quality is pretty amazing. And what about the high ISO performance? At ISO 6400, images from the GFX100RF are impressively clean, noticeably better than the X106. I'd say there's at least a 2-stop advantage here, probably a bit more than that. I've also tested dynamic range by underexposing a photo by 6 stops and then pushing it back up 6 stops during post-processing. And the result looks really nice. Compared to the X106, under similar conditions, the GFX image look much cleaner and retained way more detail. Even highlight recovery is very good. I shot this photo with a black mist filter to get that dreamy look, and I've accidentally overexposed this photo a bit, but I was able to recover pretty much all the details from the blown out area, and this photo was shot at ISO 2000. Now, about that medium format look that everyone talks about, which is basically the shallow depth of field, especially when you're shooting with wide-angle lenses. Here's the catch. The GFX100RF has a fixed 35mm f4 lens. That's roughly 28mm f3.2 in full-frame equivalent terms. So in practice, you're not getting super shallow depth of field here. In fact, I shot 2 similar photos, one with the GFX100RF and one with the X106, and surprisingly, the X106 produced shallower depth of field here. So while the GFX easily wins in sharpness and resolution, it doesn't really deliver that dreamy medium format bokeh that people expected. Now, something cool about the GFX100RF is that it has a leaf shutter. The shutter is so quiet that I didn't even realize that I had taken a shot the first time I pressed the shutter. That's a big win for street photography or when you're shooting in quiet environments. But the leaf shutter also brings 2 other huge advantages. The flash sync speed is up to 1/4000th second compared to the 1/125 second on previous GFX cameras. So that means you can shoot daytime and still able to use a camera flash in normal way with the GFX100RF. Now, this camera doesn't have in-body image stabilizer, IBIS, and that can be a downside. But thanks to the soft leaf shutter and the sensitive shutter button, I was able to handhold shots at 1/30th second and sometimes even slower, which is very impressive for such a high resolution camera. Still, when comparing it to the X106, which has both a faster f2 lens and IBIS, the X106 can hold its own in low light. In fact, under certain conditions, the X106 might even produce better handheld results just because you can shoot with a slower shutter speed and faster aperture. I shot a bunch of handheld photos at night at the Easter show, and while the GFX100RF held up okay, it really shines in good light. I end up using a monopod to shoot at 1/8 or even 1/4 second shutter speed, and that allows me to have super clean images shot under ISO 1000. One limitation I find with the leaf shutter is that when I set the camera to use the mechanical shutter and when I set the shutter speed to 1/4000th second, when the aperture is below f8, then the shutter speed display on the screen would turn orange. So I checked the user manual and Fujifilm said when the shutter speed is 1/4000th second and when you are using mechanical shutter, then the maximum aperture is f8. I believe this is the same limitation that we have on the X100 as well. I think this is one of the reasons why this camera has a built-in ND filter. One of the coolest new features on the GFX100RF is the new aspect ratio dial on top of the camera. It is super intuitive. You just turn the dial and you are switching between different aspect ratio instantly. And we are not just talking about the usual 3 or 4 different options. The GFX100RF gives you 9 different aspect ratios to choose from. Now, this isn't a totally new idea. My old Panasonic RX2 had an aspect ratio switch too. But that camera only offers 3 different choices. Here, you got options like 1:1, 3:2, 16:9, 65:24, and even 3:4 and a few other not very popular aspect ratios. It's kind of like how Fujifilm gave us a film simulation dial on the X-T50. I know some people probably wouldn't like it, but just having that quick access makes experimenting so much easier and so much more fun. And personally, I love this style. Yes, you can crop in post or change it in the menu, but for me, being able to see the aspect ratio live in the viewfinder helps my brain compose better. It also encouraged me to try out different aspect ratio and shoot differently, even when I'm still looking through the viewfinder. I end up shooting in a bunch of aspect ratios that I normally wouldn't, including more portrait orientation shots than I usually do. Now that's the funny thing. Most of the photos I shot with my mirrorless cameras are landscape orientation, but my phone photos? Almost all vertical. Why? Because how we naturally hold them. Having a 3:4 portrait ratio available in camera helped me break the habit and explore compositions I usually overlook. And this camera has my favorite 65:24 panoramic aspect ratio. I shot a lot of photos in this aspect ratio. And thanks to the 102 megapixel sensor, even after cropping to 65:24 aspect ratio, I still get around 50 megapixel output, which is more than what most full-frame cameras deliver in full resolution. That's pretty insane. And if you are shooting RAW, the RAW file still contains the full image, no matter what aspect ratio you choose. So you can reframe or switch to a different aspect ratio later in post. The GFX100RF has a digital teleconverter feature. Normally, I'm not a fan of digital zoom for photography. You usually give up a ton of resolution, and to me, I think it's just not worth it. But with the GFX100RF's 102 megapixel sensor, even at maximum crop, where it gives you an 80mm field of view, you still end up with a file that is around 20 megapixel, and that is still plenty usable. Just like with the aspect ratios, if you shoot in RAW, the RAW file retains the full uncropped image, so you can revert back to the original framing during editing. It's a non-destructive cropping. With a 35mm f4 lens, autofocus performance doesn't need to be lightning fast. And that's good because while the GFX100RF's autofocus is solid, it's not snappy like a flagship sports camera. That said, you still get subject detection and all the modern autofocus modes, even when shooting in custom aspect ratios. To me, this is a big deal. For example, with my Panasonic cameras like the S9, if I'm shooting in 65:24 aspect ratio, the autofocus get locked to a single area only, which is weird. But thankfully, Fujifilm doesn't have that weird restriction with this GFX100RF. You still have full autofocus functionality no matter how you crop it, so I love it. Okay, now let's talk about that RF in the name. A lot of people were hoping that this camera with the RF name would have the hybrid optical electronic viewfinder like the X100 series cameras. But no, this camera just has a normal electronic viewfinder. And yeah, I was a bit disappointed as well. I mean, if Fujifilm could put a hybrid viewfinder in the smaller X100, surely they could have done it here, right? But I'll say this, the electronic viewfinder on the GFX100RF is excellent. It's big, it's bright, it's very high resolution, and the lag is minimal. When I move between looking through the viewfinder and looking at the real world, the electronic viewfinder almost feels optical because of how clean and natural the view is. The transition from the rear screen to the EVF is also super fast. Would I have like a hybrid viewfinder instead? Yes, definitely. But I understand Fujifilm focus on giving us the best electronic viewfinder experience possible, and I think that is understandable. When I go back to the X100VI, the difference is huge. The GFX viewfinder is on a whole other level in terms of size and clarity. GFX100RF's electronic viewfinder just look so much nicer. And there's one feature that I really love. When you're shooting in a cropped aspect ratio or using the digital teleconverter, you can have the viewfinder show either the final image full screen or show the full sensor image with frame lines or transparent overlay. That makes the electronic viewfinder work almost like a rangefinder. You can see outside your frame, anticipate moments, and sometimes even recompose for a better shot. It's genuinely helpful and adds to the experience. Any downside with this viewfinder? Well, if you are shooting with digital zoom or shooting under low light, the live preview quality drops noticeably. The image gets pixelated or noisy, even though the final photo looks fine. Hopefully, this is something Fujifilm can improve with their Kaizen firmware update later. Now, I almost don't want to talk about video in this review because I think even Fujifilm, they barely mention video during their GFX100RF launch livestream. And honestly, that says it all. The GFX100RF can shoot 4K 30 frame video in 10-bit, but it cannot capture 6K or 8K video, and stabilization is digital only. The built-in anti-filter can be used in video mode to help you control the shutter speed, which is great, but I'm a bit disappointed the aspect ratio down doesn't do anything in video mode, or otherwise it would be great if the camera allow you to create some square shape or vertical video straight from the camera. Put it on the tripod and the video looks pretty good, but that's pretty much it. It's very clearly a photography first camera. Wrapping up this review is actually kind of hard because there are so many things that I really love about this camera, but there are also a few things that make me go, so close. Let's start with the good thing first. This camera is tiny for a medium format camera. The body is only slightly bigger than a X106 and is packing a sensor that's 4 times the size. That's pretty insane. The build quality? Absolutely top notch. Better than the already excellent X100. Everything feels premium. All the buttons, dials, even the included leather strap is top quality. Image quality is phenomenal. Compared to the 40 megapixel X106, the 102 megapixel sensor with the 35mm f4 lens gives you noticeably more detail, flexibility in pose, and sharpness across the frame. Even against my 61 megapixel Sony a7CR, the photos from the GFX100RF still looks better. And maybe most importantly, it's just fun to shoot with this camera. I can't really show that with a spec chart or some figures, but the dials on the camera, the tactile feeling, the big viewfinder, the leaf shutter, and that very solid body, it all adds up to a camera that makes you want to go out and shoot. And it almost feels like it is 2 cameras in one. A very high resolution medium format camera and also a variable aspect ratio full frame camera. Let me explain myself. When shooting with different aspect ratio, even after cropping, you still got an effective sensor area that is more or less the size of a full frame sensor. And now let's talk about the things I wish it has. I really wish the lens was faster. f2.8 would have been ideal, not just for the more shallow depth of field look, but for better low light shooting as well. With no eyeburst and an f4 lens, the low light handheld shooting performance is not as good as what I want it to be. The electronic viewfinder, while excellent, does suffer a bit in low light and during digital zoom, but hopefully that is something that can be fixed with firmware. So would I recommend this camera? If you are a beginner, honestly, no. Even if you can afford it. The GFX100RF is not beginner friendly. It demands a bit of experience and discipline to get the most out of it. The files are huge, it's less forgiving in low light, and without stabilization, even slight motion can blur those ultra detailed 102 megapixel shots. If you are choosing between the X106 and this GFX100RF, I like to compare it like this. The X106 is like a really nice consumer sports car. It's fast, it's easy to drive, and it's super fun. The GFX100RF, that's a race car. Insanely powerful, super capable, but there's almost no driver assist. Compared to the mirrorless cameras in the market that you can swap lenses and there are tons of features, the GFX100RF has a lot of limitations. But at the same time, I think this is a camera that can help you to become a better photographer. You cannot rely on shallow depth of field to make some pretty photos. You cannot rely on high burst speed to help you capture the precise moment. And without IBIS, you also have to be really careful when you click the shutter button. And the fixed 35mm focal length also really push you to be more creative about your composition. But you may ask me, why don't you just shoot with some old crappy cameras? Well, that's because if you manage to conquer all these challenges, you'll be rewarded with stunning images that only medium format can give you. And also, this GFX100RF can give you absolutely amazing shooting experience. This is the camera that makes me want to go out and shoot some photos. Honestly, this camera makes me want to book another trip to Japan. I just imagine walking through the quiet suburban streets in the morning, or shooting the chaos of Shinjuku or Shibuya at night. The GFX100RF won't be the easiest camera to shoot the streets of Japan, but I think I like the challenge. That 28mm equivalent focal length and medium format combo, I think that would be perfect for street photography. Shooting Tokyo cityscapes at 102 megapixel? Yes, please. Maybe I can convince Fujifilm to lend me the camera again for a week and let me take it to Japan. But I still need to save up the trip and convince my wife that this is a good idea. Well, we'll see.